Welcome to the Sermon in the Valley with Pastor Rob Eller. You can find us on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, and iHeartRadio. If you like what you hear, please subscribe to the podcast on any of those platforms and share it with your friends and family. Thank you. Welcome back to the Sermon in the Valley, everybody. Pastor Rob Eller here with your Monday sermon episode with the readings in my sermon from yesterday, September 24th, the 17th Sunday after Pentecost. Let's get started. A reading from the 3rd and 4th chapters of Jonah. When God saw what the people of Nineveh did, how they turned from their evil ways, God changed his mind about the calamity that he said he would bring upon them, and he did not do it. But this was very displeasing to Jonah, and he became angry. He prayed to the Lord and said, "O Lord, is this not what I said while I was still in my own country? That is why I fled to Tarshish at the beginning, for I knew that you are a gracious God and merciful, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love, and ready to relent from punishing. And now, O Lord, please take my life from me, for it is better for me to die than to live." And the Lord said, "Is it right for you to be angry?" Then Jonah went out of the city and sat down east of the city, and made a booth for himself there. He sat under it in the shade, waiting to see what would become of the city. The Lord God appointed a bush and made it come up over Jonah to give shade over his head, to save him from his discomfort. So Jonah was very happy about the bush. But when dawn came up the next day, God appointed a worm that attacked the bush, so that it withered. When the sun rose, God prepared a sultry east wind, and the sun beat down on the head of Jonah so that he was faint and asked that he might die. He said, "It is better for me to die than to live." But God said to Jonah, "Is it right for you to be angry about the bush?" He said, "Yes, angry enough to die." Then the Lord said, "You are concerned about the bush, for which you did not labor, and which you did not grow. It came into being in the night and perished in a night. And should I not be concerned about Nineveh, the great city, in which there are more than 120,000 persons who do not know their right hand from their left, and also many animals?" The word of the Lord. The Holy Gospel according to St. Matthew, the 20th chapter. Jesus said to the disciples, "The kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. After agreeing with the laborers for the usual daily wage, he sent them into his vineyard. When he went out about 9 o'clock, he saw others standing idle in the marketplace and said to them, 'You also go into the vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right.' So they went. When he went out again about noon, and about 3 o'clock, he did the same. And about 5 o'clock he went out and found others standing around, and he said to them, 'Why are you standing here idle all day?' They said to him, 'Because no one has hired us.' He said to them, 'You also go into the vineyard.' When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his manager, 'Call the laborers and give them their pay, beginning with the last and then going to the first.' When those hired about 5 o'clock came, each of them received the usual daily wage. Now when the first came, they thought that they would receive more, but each of them also received the usual daily wage. And when they received it, they grumbled against the landowner, saying, 'These last worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us, who have borne the burden of the day in the scorching heat.' But he replied to one of them, 'Friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for the usual daily wage? Take what belongs to you and go. I chose to give to this last the same as I gave to you. Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Or are you envious because I am generous? So the last will be first, and the first will be last. The Gospel of the Lord. Compassion for others. It's something that seems to be in short supply nowadays. We have this mindset that it's us versus them, and we have to make sure we get ours at the expense of everyone else. We see it now in most, if not all, the facets of our lives. This time of year, we see campaigns heating up as we get closer to Election Day. It used to be that people would say, "I want to work for you," and they're pleased to get your vote. But now it's become, "I want to fight for you." And those candidates take on this posture that they're going to war to face this enemy, when instead of trying to convince you that they're the best person that is looking out for your interests. Instead of doing what is best for everyone, especially the least of these, they want to pick fights with anyone that opposes them. The love and compassion for others disappears, and instead it's all about me, myself, and I. We've become self-centered as a culture, not caring about others, and if someone asks us for help, our first response isn't, "What can I do for you?" It's become, "What's in it for me?" Moreover, when someone else gets the same treatment as us, or is treated nicely and we don't think they deserve it, we throw a fit and start to complain. We see it all the time with people complaining about those who get food or medical assistance, as if the need to take care of their bodies and to nourish themselves is some sort of inconvenience for the rest of us. I've been on Medicaid, and I know plenty of people who have also received medical care through that, and who have been able to get food for their families through SNAP benefits. And I'm sure many of you have too. They're regular people just like us, who have needed some help and compassion to get by. Having volunteered at food pantries and homeless shelters, not once did I think I was above the people who were receiving help, especially since I needed that same help later on. Even worse is when we have this belief that we're above others, that somehow because of who they are, where they're from, what they look like, or what they believe, there are people that are beneath us and less than us. With that belief comes the idea that we are to get whatever it is we want, and that others will just have to do with whatever's left over if there's anything at all. Rather than each of us getting an equal share of the pie, people with a superiority complex believe that they get the entire pie, and everyone else can just make do with the crumbs left behind. Even as the church, we struggle with self-centeredness. One of the greatest stumbling blocks, if not the greatest, to the spiritual health of the church, and a huge frustration of pastors and clergy, is the inability to embrace the belief that the grace of God is for all people. There is a subset of Christians known as Universalists that believe everyone is saved. Period. While this is a hard thing to wrap our heads around, it's definitely unchristian to hope that it isn't true. Because why wouldn't we want everyone to have the chance at salvation? But you know who did scoff at people who didn't think deserved help or compassion from God? Jonah. The same Jonah who was swallowed by a giant fish while he was trying to avoid doing God's work. I identify with Jonah because I too tried to avoid and flee from the calling that God was putting on me into going to ministry. But that is where the similarities end. After Jonah spent some time in the belly of the giant fish, he finally relented and agreed to do what God had set out for him. But he did it begrudgingly, and he complained about it the whole time. The job that Jonah was given to prophesy to the city of Nineveh to get them to turn back to God. The problem in Jonah's eyes? Nineveh was the capital of the Assyrian Empire. and Jonah didn't believe they deserved to be saved. Jonah, like many of us, didn't want anything to do with that universal love from God. But out of fear for his own life, Jonah finally relented and carried on to Nineveh, if anything, just to get God off his back. He went into the city, proclaimed what God had told him to, and sat back and waited. He didn't wait thinking they would actually listen. Instead, he wanted to see what punishment God would bring. To his displeasure, the king and the people of Nineveh listened and repented, and God spared them, which only made Jonah even angrier at God. He lashed out at God, saying, "I knew you would do this. Why did I even bother coming here if you're going to save them all along?" And quoted the psalm we sang today, "You are gracious and merciful, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love." Jonah did not want to accept that God's love is for everyone, everywhere, not just a chosen few. Jonah believes they deserve the wrath of God just because of who they are, not for any other reason. He feels they haven't earned the same treatment that everyone else gets. Seeing Jonah act like a petulant, spoiled little child, God decides to have some fun with him and teach him a broader lesson. Jonah sets up a little booth or a temporary shelter to sit in and wait for what he believes Nineveh really deserves. Because despite God relenting from punishing the city, Jonah isn't convinced. God places a bush or a tree there to give Jonah some shade from the sun and wind, which puts Jonah in a good mood. Until the next day when God takes the bush away, exposing Jonah to the heat once again, which just makes him angry. The wind that beats on Jonah is an allusion to the Ruach, or the wind from God, that many prophets encounter. But this time it's only there to bring discomfort to Jonah. The whole point God is making with Jonah is that he is only caring about himself. He cares more about this bush that was there for less than a day than he does a group of people that God wanted to save. Jesus also understood this point. I'm sure there was some quarreling and bickering among the disciples about the scale and scope of the salvation that was being promised to them by Jesus. After all, they had argued about who was the greatest disciple. Jesus goes on to explain how salvation truly works by comparing everyone to day laborers in a vineyard. Starting with the early morning and throughout the day, the landowner keeps going into the city looking for people to work in the vineyard, right up until about an hour before the end of the workday. At the end of the day, he calls the workers to him so that they can collect their wages, starting with those who came at the end. As he hands them their money, those who worked the longest see that the laborers who were there only for an hour got a full day's wage, which probably gets them excited because it means they'll make even more. But imagine their disappointment when they only get that same amount. Those workers try to complain that it's not fair that they all got the same amount despite doing different amounts of work. The landowner tells the disgruntled workers that it doesn't matter how long each worked for. They all agree to the usual daily wage, and that he can do what he wants since it's his money, and they are not to be envious because of his generosity. This parable is clearly meant for us. God is the landowner, we're the workers, and we can't complain that we all get treated the same by God. God's love and grace is for everyone, no questions asked. I'd wager a guess that most of us were baptized as infants. But that doesn't make us any more of a believer than those that were baptized as adults. The Roman Emperor Constantine, the first to allow Christianity in the Roman Empire, wasn't baptized until he was on his deathbed. The thief on the cross next to Jesus turned to him and said, "Remember me when you come into your kingdom." This thief, who until that moment was not part of the faith, didn't follow Jesus, turned to Jesus and asked him simply to remember him. What did Jesus do? Did he say, "Oh, I'm sorry, you weren't a believer long enough"? Of course not. He said, "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." You better believe that thief is among the saints in heaven. In fact, he is venerated in the Catholic and Orthodox churches as Saint Dismas. It doesn't matter when we become Christians, we all get the same reward in the end. That was the point Jesus was making. Salvation is for everyone. Your status here in this life bears no difference to your reward in heaven. There isn't a tiered system where if you are more righteous or the longer you are a believer, you get more than everyone else. That isn't the case. You don't earn love and grace from God. Those are gifts given freely to everyone because frankly, there is no way we could ever earn those on our own. Jesus drove that point home with the last line in the gospel. So the last will be first, and the first will be last. If we think we somehow deserve more, then the back of the line we go, because we are wrong. I've said it many times and I'll keep saying it even more. The love of God is the great equalizer. And that love is for everyone, even if we are like Jonah and don't think people deserve it. Ultimately, it's not up to us to decide who does and doesn't get the love and compassion of God. It is up to us, however, to spread that love and compassion to everyone we see, no matter what we think of them. Maybe that love and compassion we show is all it takes for them to see the goodness of God and turn back. We never know what will happen when we show kindness. But I will tell you, nothing bad comes out of it. We are the laborers, and out there in the world, that is the vineyard. A few months ago, the gospel reading was, "The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few." We need more laborers in that vineyard with us, spreading the love and compassion and good news of Jesus any way we can. It's up to us to bring in those extra hands to do the work set out before us, to feed the hungry, clothe the naked, shelter the homeless, heal the sick, and stand up and be the voice for those whose voices have been silenced and who have been pushed aside. That is the work in the vineyard that needs to be done. Let's get out there, get our hands dirty, making the world a better place. And all of God's people said, Amen. There is work to be done, and we are the ones who are to do it. Thank you for tuning in today and listening to the sermon. If you like what you hear, please share this podcast with your friends and family. Spread the good news to all who need to hear it. You can find us on multiple platforms: Spotify, Amazon, iHeartRadio, and Google Podcasts. God's peace be with all of you. Have a blessed day.